EA Games has been coming under a lot of scrutiny these past few years, and even with successes like Jedi Survivor, Fallen Order, and their live service titles like EA Sports and Apex Legends to an extent, they have also been, flopping a little bit. This isn't me talking about how EA is going to fail within the next 5 years if they don't change their ways, because I believe that they will be a successful company within the next decade and they'll continue to do so. But I feel like they do need to change trajectory in some way in order to actually make sure that they won't fall behind the rest of the industry. When I mention Electronic Arts, what's the game that comes to your mind first? More likely than not, it's probably a multiplayer live service-like title. Battlefield, Battlefront, a sports game. Unless I'm specifying BioWare or Visceral Games, the developers of Dragon Age, Mass Effect, and the original Dead Space titles, you probably think of live service titles. And during the Xbox One and PS4 console generation, that is what EA was really pushing for. Live service, microtransactions, loot boxes. And if you've been following Electronic Arts for about 6 years now, you would know that one of the EA executives back in 2019 said to UK Parliament with a stern, serious face that loot boxes are surprise mechanics. They were literally going to tell the government of the UK literally anything to attempt to defend gambling in video games, because that is what the loot boxes were. Loot boxes were so hated in the Star Wars Battlefront community that they quite literally had to apologize. An EA executive said we got it wrong and promised to be better. Now, if they made a ton of money on it, they probably wouldn't really care. But of course, after the whole fiasco of the loot boxes in Star Wars Battlefront 2 that completely destroyed and ruined the progression of that game, and after their stocks started to plummet because of the loot box fiasco, it would make sense to apologize. Now, to EA's credit, I will give them that they have been moving towards more single-player titles, especially in the last few years with the successes of Fallen Order, Jedi Survivor, and It Takes Two, a game by Hazelight that was published by EA. But they continue to screw over their sports games community by reselling recycled video games and every year increasing the prices and increasing the amount of microtransactions that are in said games for sheer profit. Because the majority of EA's revenue and profit every single year is coming from those games. If they didn't have those titles, their company could literally die. But in the last year and a half, I'd like to say in particular, EA has been really fumbling on what they choose to invest in, other than Split Fiction, which is Hazelight's next game. But other games that the EA publishing chooses to invest in, like Immortals of Avium, which was like a first-person wizard kind of game, a lot of powers, really pretty graphics, but a really basic story in a game that I just wouldn't say is all that enjoyable. The game costed the studio and EA $125 million, and to quote the executive, no one bought it. I mean, when you're an EA executive and you see that a game that you're publishing and the studio invested over $100 million into, and the return on that is barely anything because no one wanted to play the game because it looked like another basic Unreal Engine 5 title, you're going to be pretty pissed off. So you already have a massive failure under your wing, right? $100 million in debt, the game probably barely broke like even a few 100,000 sales, and, It Takes Two is extremely successful for the publishing and for the studio. We're very happy about that. But you're kind of itching back towards the live service route. Look, maybe if this game was multiplayer, it would have been more successful. And then you decide, hey, BioWare, we know you're developing a live service Dragon Age game, but you know what? We're going to take a chance on you. How about we switch it back to single player and you'll get 2 years to develop that? And naturally, of course, the developers that are still awake and not crying at their desks are like, okay, so we've rebooted this game 4 times. We're just going to be turning all of our live service multiplayer mechanics, and then they cobble together some sort of Frankenstein version of a single player Dragon Age title, and it can't even sell 2 million copies, and it's literally their biggest franchise. But it's not like Dragon Age the Veilguard was a complete failure, because media were able to say that it was a success because it was the #1 selling game on Steam for maybe a week. And oh look, it had more players than Jedi Survivor concurrently. Wow, that's crazy. And they say that it outsold Survivor because of that. Like, are you dumb? But you know what EA took from Dragon Age the Veilguard's failure? It wasn't that they cobbled together, again, a Frankenstein of a live service title, pushed it into a single player, attempt at a Dragon Age title in 2 years after they told BioWare, reboot it again. It wasn't because of the terrible narrative, wasn't because of the boring characters, or even subpar gameplay. It was because it wasn't live service. You got BioWare in one corner, literally struggling to produce any sort of a product, and then the EA CEO is like, players want shared worlds and, experiences where they can play together. Like, what? Like, How is that the lesson you learn from the Veilguard's failure? You say, oh, it should have been live service. Oh my god. The EA's CEO comments suggested that to sell the game beyond its core audience, it needed to merge high-quality narratives with the evolving demands of players, which are apparently those shared world mechanics and the deeper engagement. He then goes on to state that Dragon Age had a high-quality launch and was well reviewed by critics and those who played. However, it did not resonate with a broad enough audience in this highly competitive market. You released a poor game, and the amount of controversy surrounding your game killed the game. Like, I swear to god, the EA CEO is the most out-of-touch human being on the planet. You cannot tell me that your takeaway from Dragon Age the Veilguard is, oh, it should have been a multiplayer live service title. That can't be what you took away. That genuinely can't. I expect Mass Effect 5 to nearly have the real potential of it being a live service title, and I pray that it's not, because there's no way that it being live service is going to save the game. What you need, and what they have done, is to restructure BioWare. So hopefully we can have any sort of please for the love of God don't mess this up energy. The whole statement from the EA CEO Andrew Wilson even had former Dragon Age Origins writers responding, stating that they could kind of see the thinking behind his take, with the company bigwigs typically looking at profit margins of live service titles and concluding that everyone should follow suit, and continuing on stating that there are certainly all sorts of lessons a company could learn from a game like Veilguard, but maybe it should have been live service being the takeaway seems a bit short-sighted and self-serving. That's a very tame way of saying that the EA CEO is an absolute moron at saying, hey look, Dragon Age the Veilguard failed because it wasn't live service, not because of the poor management decisions and because of the rebooting of the game 4 times and terrible narrative. Like, it's genuinely the biggest deflection that I feel like I've ever seen in the video game industry. It's, oh, it's not our fault. It's the competitive market's fault. It's because it wasn't live service. It's because it didn't compete properly. Not because it was us rebooting the game 4 times. No, couldn't be me. There was even a former creative director of Dragon Age that has been with the IP since its inception state that if someone said to me the key to the successful single-player IP success is to make it purely a multiplayer game, no, not a spin-off, fundamentally change the DNA of what people loved about the core game, I'd probably, like, quit that job. And what's really funny is that is exactly why the majority of the past and amazing BioWare developers that are not there anymore aren't there anymore. EA pushed for live service titles in Andromeda and Inquisition, and oh my god with Anthem. And Anthem was such a bad decision by everybody involved. But what's really disappointing is that EA is taking the wrong lesson here, of course, because when they actually create single player games that are not attempted live service titles and then once again Frankensteined and cobbled together into single player titles like the Dead Space remake, for example, that remake can even outperform a game created by your former developers. People that worked at your studio, Visceral Games, went off to make a new game called Callisto Protocol, and it failed. Now, granted, to the studio that did create Callisto Protocol, shooting for 5 million copies on your first title, even with having the namesake of a former Dead Space director and the insane marketing push that you did have, probably a really bad idea to say, hey look, let's sell 5 million copies of this title. Because yeah, you did make a gorgeous video game, but the rest of it was garbage. Kind of like Dragon Age the Veilguard. Circling all the way back to the whole microtransaction first push is when Andrew Wilson, the current CEO of EA, really came in at 2014 and stated that he wanted a player-first corporate strategy, offering more free-to-play titles and in-app purchases. Now, naturally, these games with those microtransactions, a lot of them didn't go free-to-play. So other than Bethesda and the Golden Horse Armor, this is who we really have to blame for the huge push of microtransactions in our current day titles. But let's take a look at EA in its current times. Yes, they've been pushing for more single-player titles, but as of their last sports title, which did not do so well, and Dragon Age the Veilguard, their stock plummeted this past month, going down 8%. Now, it has been kind of, going back up a little bit, but losing like almost $20 on your share value in one day because you announced that the Veilguard quite literally fumbled in literally every single expectation that you did have, even with your already extremely low expectations. So instead of EA taking a step back and realizing, hey, maybe we should, continue our path with single player titles, because when we get them right, we make a lot of money. Instead of that, nah, you know what, live service it up. It's not our fault, it's the competitive market. EA really must decide where they want to go in the industry over the next year or two, I would say. Yes, there's going to be another single-player Star Wars title. It's probably going to be really good. Might be buggy at launch like the last two, but it's probably going to be a really solid video game. They're developing Skate or Skate 4. They're developing an Iron Man single-player title. They are still sticking with single-player games. So if you're worried about that, probably don't be for the next few years. Now, after those few years, if these games aren't massive successes like It Takes Two and The Fallen Order with 8 million copies sold, I'm imagining that they're going to be really pushing for live service titles. But I also believe the next Battlefield title specifically is really going to show how they're going to be handling their future live service titles, and if this next Battlefield game can even be as successful as the original Battlefields, like even going way back to Battlefield 1 or Bad Company or even 4. In 10 years, EA's stock could double, triple, quadruple, and they could still be one of the most successful AAA publishing conglomerates in the industry, or they could fall to the depths of Ubisoft. Just no matter what they put out, it does not seem to succeed. But what I hope from that company is that they continue doing single player games, because when they put the effort in, when they try, especially from their first party studios, especially from studios like Motive, and when BioWare can hopefully actually get a chance instead of rebooting a live service title 4 times over, when they do it right, they do it right. So I'm hoping they stick with that single player aspect of what makes those games special. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like, sharing, commenting, and subscribing, and maybe becoming a member if you so choose to. With as low as $1, you get access to some perks like early access to my videos, emojis, and all that good stuff. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
And the game award goes to, oh man, I have to pay a microtransaction to unlock. That's so stupid that this has to, hold on, I got this, guys, here we go. You know it's true, it's really stupid.